Yeah, so this will be a quick guide in response to a comment I got. First of all, let's start with the very basics. If you create a new canvas, you will have 2 layers preset, one raster layer, meaning that there is no background, everything is transparent. And then you'll have something called paper. Now this will be your background color, and a neat tip here, you can double click onto the canvas and then set it to whatever background color you want it to be. I like to set it to a little bit less bright white, so it's easier on the eyes. Now we'll start off by looking at the sketch. I have first drawn the character onto a raster layer, and then I put them into a folder and set the folder here. If you go to layer property, I then set it to layer color, and this way everything inside that folder that I drew will become this color. The reason why I didn't set the layer property of the sketch itself to that color but did it with the folder is because later on, if I sketch another thing, I can just plop that into a folder and it will also turn into the same color. So I don't have to set the layer property for every single layer that I put into this folder. It will do it automatically. Now just to show you, so you have also an idea on what else you can do with layer property, let's draw a quick nice character. There you go. Kind of looks awkward though. I mean, if it already looks awkward, let's make it completely, yes, beautiful. So what you can do is go to layer property. Either you can set it to one color, you can tone it. This will be more useful if you want to tone pictures or photos as a pattern. And the other thing that you can do is you can go here on border effect, and this is probably one of the most practical ones. It will create a border on the whole lines that you drew. I find this quite a cool, neat thing. Because this means that if I draw on this layer, it will always have this border. And I don't know, I find it quite cool. Okay, so after we've done the sketch here, I will set it quite low by putting down the opacity bar up here. And in my case, I like to do it very, very low so I can always check upon the balance of the picture, because this sketch is using very thick lines at some parts and the line art that I do is quite fine, so the sketch might not look good with finer lines, so I have to adjust it. For an example here, the cheek is less big than in the sketch, because here it looks nice because I have a balance of thick line, thin line, thick line, thin line. So it kind of makes sense for it to not be that proportionally cautious, we'll say. But with finer lines, that does not look good, so I have to adjust it. I also keep the eye line art and the rest of the line art separate. I like to erase a lot from the eyeline art later on, and this is just easier for me to get to the folder than to have it inside here, because as you'll see now, I have all of my line art separated. This is just because I find this easier if I have to correct something, and later in the drawing process, in the coloring process I mean, I will color in the line art, and it is easier to just lock the single layers after I set them to become raster layers and put in color that way than to go and zoom in and be like, okay, so I can make this line red up until here with a brush and here and here. It's just too much work. Rather than that, I will just create a raster layer here, and then I'll go and combine to layer below, and that way the vector layer that I had for fluff will become a raster layer, and I can lock it up here. Let's take red, and then I can turn all of it red. This is a lot easier than to have all of the line arts on one layer, I think. Now, I've already mentioned this now, that all of my line art is done on vector layers, and there are several reasons for that. First, let's create a layer folder. You can do that by clicking on the folder symbol up here, double click on the name, And then I'll set this one to guide. And you might be already curious about these colors. You can take them up on here, change palette color. You can choose one of the presets, or you can go here where you can take your own color or something from your color palette. I will just take a very light turquoise. This will be our guide folder. I will put this raster layer inside of it, so we can compare vector layers to raster layers. Let's say with the raster layer down here that I draw something and I suddenly want to have this little hair part not as much down below as I did it, but in order to do that, because I did it on the same layer, I would have to erase this part over here and then take up the hair and then redraw a line here. So that's what we'll do. Just to show you how the results would look. I would have to move it up here. And redraw that part, erase that part. And of course I did it very sluggishly here, but still, even if I did it with all of my effort, you would still be able to tell that I erased stuff here. This part isn't part of the rest of the line, like I drew that later on, you can tell. And let's do the same thing, the same mistake on the vector layer, where I would draw the hair on the same layer as the skin. And be like, oh no, I don't want it to be this low. Now, so what you can do with the vector layer is just select the lines that you want to move, and then you can move that. There you go. You don't need this line. Now what I did here, because these are not just one but 3 separate lines, what I did here is I pressed Shift and then selected the other lines, and I can move them together. If I were to only select this line, then I could only move this one. But look, I can freely adjust this however I like. And now we come to a fun part. I can use the vector eraser. And what this vector eraser does, let me show you here. A vector eraser erases one of the points that you have with vector lines. Now above, this is our raster line. There's nothing here, I can move it, but there's nothing else there. My vector line has control points which I can move freely. And I can also delete them by going to this symbol, correct line, and then going to delete control points under control point, and deleting the points that I no longer need or which I find unnecessary. And with vector eraser you simply do the same thing, but you do it by erasing all of the control points up to where they meet another line. And this way there are no eraser marks here. You won't be able to notice that there was another line here. It's perfect. If I tried to erase the same lines over here with a normal eraser, I would have to be very careful. But if you zoom in, you can still see that this is kind of going in like that. And here you can see this kind of shape. And the same thing goes for the ends of the lines. Like I could try to erase them in a way where you wouldn't be able to notice from afar that they were erased. Like I could try to make it look more natural, but if you zoom in, you will immediately be able to tell, like, okay, this goes in here and this is like this. This is not how a stroke would look, a line stroke would look if you drew it naturally. However, with the control points, just like I showed, click on delete control point, and then if we erase a point, it will always look natural no matter what. And this is a big benefit and advantage of using vector layers for line art, because your line art will look tight, it will be neat and it will be clean. And you have a lot more tools for vector layers that I don't even have to go into. I think you can just play around with these. Like the pinch tool basically takes the control points, the little circles that you've just seen, and you can drag them however you want. Or another tool that I find very practical, and you can do this with Raster as well, is adjust line width. So let's look at this little figure. I want to have it become more fine lined. What you can do is you can narrow the lines with adjust line width, narrow, or you can thicken them with thick. You can do this both on a raster layer and on the vector layer. There you go. But what you can't do on a raster layer, what you can do on the vector layer is use this to redraw a vector line width. Now what this does is, by drawing, the pen will actually use the control points that you've just seen, the little circles, and draw along those lines with a pen that you've now selected, the 15 size. And I could go up to 17 and I would draw along the very same lines. Like, see, I can't draw anywhere else. It will go along those control points. On the opposite, you could be like, no, I want it to be a 4. I think a thinner line would look much more neat here. Just have to be careful because you have to click on the control points, and the bigger the stroke is, obviously the harder it will be to get on top of the control point. And this way you have the same line art that you did before, but with a different line size. And this is quite practical if you draw a drawing first with thicker lines and then halfway in, after having painstakingly drawn all of it on your vector lines, you can then change them to thinner lines instead of having to draw the whole drawing again. So yeah, definitely use vector layers for your line art. And for the color, I use raster layers because you don't really need all of that fancy stuff when it comes to the color base, at least not how I draw. And we'll just quickly go it. I set the opacity a little bit lower so you can see the line art as well. So in all of these folders that I have separated the base of every part of the body, and I have set the base color, this grayish color that I used. I've set the layer of that to a dark black or dark gray, if you will. So I know while I clip stuff on top of it that this is my base. This is basically how I would draw in my normal process. Let me get the brush here. Like, I would just clip another layer on top of that base layer. You can clip them by clicking on this little symbol over here, and that way nothing will go over your base. And then I would do all of the lines on top of it like this. The further detailing I would do on top of it. Obviously not this bold and more detailed, but this is just an example. This won't be the actual picture. And then I would clip this as well. And you might use the settings over here if you want to do something fancy, but I only use these tools when I highlight and add dark shadows. So it's unnecessary for this step yet. And then after I have all of these clip layers on top with adding detail and more stuff, I will then click on here, combine to layer below, and combine all of these things. But I will not combine it to a base. The reason for that is, if later on I see a gap somewhere in here, I can then, just to be consistent, take the color I used for the base, but I will use red here so you can see what I'm doing. And let's say I want another hair strain to go like this. So I can just add this part to the base, and when I clip the stuff, obviously this isn't done, but if I clip this stuff, because this is only clipped, you would have all of the surrounding colors still there, and I wouldn't have to like add more detailing to this part that I just added to a base. It will just take up all of the details that are on the clip layer on top. Now I don't have any details up here because obviously this isn't done. There would be more clip layers here, but as an example, if I wanted the upper part to be dark and the lower part to be lighter, then it would also take up those things and I don't have to redo it, and I can keep going. I can just add stuff as I want. I do this quite a bit with the hair because at the very last step I like to add more smaller and more thinner hairlines to the whole base hair to just give it a little bit more filling, kind of a little bit more detail. Now another thing that I will show you which I don't use is the reference layer technique. I don't need it because I have other ways to do the same thing, but just so you know it and you have heard about it, this is the reference symbol. Click on that and now your line art, only the line art that you have here, will be referenced for anything that you do. For an example, if you go to fill, refer to other layers, then you select here the reference symbol. If you don't, then this won't work. So select this symbol over here, take a color, and then everything that will fill in, it will use this line art as a reference and not the whole line art as a reference. For an example, let's delete this filling. If I no longer have this set as a reference layer and I set this back to refer to all layers, then it will also refer to a line art of a chibi in the background. So if you don't want that to happen, you can select this to be a reference layer, then go to fill, make that a reference layer, and then you can just fill in the color only to the line art that you want. Something very practical that I do want to show you that I use quite a bit is the mask layer. I use this mostly when I draw my manga, so I'm going to give you an example of that. Now I like to do most of the hatching. This is what you call hatching, when you cross the lines like this to create a shadow. I do that mostly manually for my manga because I think it has more style that way. It has a different effect than copy and pasting these lines. And let me just quickly do this. So you click here on this symbol, create mask layer, and it will create this layer. And what you can think of this as is that now the layer where your hatching is on, this one, is clipped to a mask layer. And when you create a mask layer, it will be pre-filled. So it won't be transparent. We want to get rid of that fill, so click on delete after selecting the mask layer. And then now comes the fun part where you will be like, oh my god, this is saving me so much time. Why didn't I do this before? I hate erasing. Finally. So you can just go into your now empty mask layer and then fill in inside your character. Wait, how? Yes, I still have it to reference. So put it back to all layers, not reference. And here you go. Perfect. You don't have to erase the hatching. It's inside the character. Perfect. You don't need the rest. There you go. So, for those who might think like, oh my god, this will be a huge help. Yes, it will be. Like, this is just so practical, so unbelievably practical. I'm angry with myself that I didn't do it before. And now, let's say, oh, I want my character to have a different shape after all, or you want to make little adjustments to it. Now, if you didn't have a mask layer and you have already erased the hatching here, what you would have to do is create a new raster layer and then add hatching that way. But what I have realized, like doing this quite a bit in the past, is that you will always be able to see where the hatching starts and where it ends. Like I can tell from this that you hatched this part first and this was added afterwards. It's quite obvious. So instead of doing that, just put that layer away. We don't need it. Just delete again the contents of your mask layer and then add fill into a mask layer again, and voila, you will have all of the hatching that is inside. Let me show you, that you have drawn before. Like all of that hatching still exists up here, but because the mask layer is only fit inside the character, you will only see inside the character as well. Then in this case, all you would have to do is go to a hatching layer and then add a little bit more hatching inside here at the side, because we didn't have hatching there. But it's a lot easier and a lot quicker than having to do all of the hatching again. The rest, like I said, look at it yourself. Take your time to get used to some of the tools. You don't have to use mask layers and vector layers now all together, but slowly kind of approach those tools because they will help you later on to be a lot quicker. Now, this was all I could tell you. So have a wonderful day, guys, and have fun drawing. Bye bye.